the California Arts Council and Beverly Hills Arts Commission is the former West Coast editor of Andy Warhol's Interview magazine and society editor of the Herald Examiner. Her cover stories can be read in Venice and Detour magazines, and she is a contributing editor to California Apparel News. For the next half hour, Joan will bring you inside news and views on society, art, film, and the exhilarating worlds of these multifaceted people. Here is Joan Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to Joan Quinn, Etc. Our guest is Shelley Taylor Morgan. You'll recognize her from her 3-year stint at General Hospital, just after that Luke and Laura thing. She has a reoccurring role, or she had a reoccurring role on Hunter, and Shelley's been in numerous TV shows and spots all over, but now she's working on the ABC Home Show. First of all, Shelley, tell us why the 3 names.
Well, that's very interesting. When I decided to become an actress, I decided I would pick a last name that I liked, and I went through the phone book, and Morgan was the one that I ended up with. And my now husband, his last name's Taylor, and a girlfriend said something about, well, what about his last name? And I realized he really had an important role in being my mentor for the acting business, so I took his last name as my middle name.
He wasn't in the business?
Not at all. I was smart.
And you didn't do 3 names to get longer billing?
Well, when I was on General Hospital and I said, oh, I'm going to see my name on the credit, they put Shelley T. Morgan. So It didn't do any good at all.
Have you just done TV work, or?
No, I've done a little bit of everything. I've done plays. I've done movies of the week, theatrical movies, television, episodic, sitcom, dramas. I've done it all.
Where did you start?
Well, where did I start? The first thing I did was a film. And
here in Los Angeles?
Yes, It was called The Sword and the Sorcerer. Sci-fi type of, medieval type of a movie. And from there, right after that, I think I got General Hospital, so it happened very quickly, because I was a medical secretary before I was ever an actress.
Oh, did you go to school here in the city?
Yes, I went to Uni High.
Oh, you're a local.
Yeah, and I took shorthand at 140 and typed 100 words a minute, and I worked over at UCLA in the Division of Medical Genetics.
Wow.
And one day I said, there's got to be a better way to make a living. I know, I'll be an actress.
With all those skills? Yes. I don't know about that. How did that acting career in General Hospital then lead you into this Q&A situation?
Well, that's very interesting. When I was on General Hospital, I'd be invited on to talk shows all the time, and it just seemed every time I was invited on one, they'd say, how would you like to come back again and do it on a regular basis? So one thing led to another. I co-hosted AM Los Angeles a few times. I worked on a show called Value Television and STN, and went on as a guest on the Home Show, and the producer said, hey, let's have her on as a regular, and the next thing I know, there I am.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Are you responsible for your own segments? Do you write them?
It's a collaborative thing, especially when I'm on location. You're interviewing someone, and you have to condense what they're telling you and write it in your mind and speak it into the camera. So yes, you are writing. Sometimes it is written for me. As I said, it's a collaboration.
And then how do you find the person that you're going to feature in your segment?
Well, if I find it myself, I haunt movie magazines, people, decorating magazines, any kind of literature that I can get my hand on that's topical. And I'll see that an article is on someone or talks about something that I'm interested in, and then I'll have the research staff.
You've done a lot of segments on collectors. Mm-hmm. And how do you find them? And why?
Why? Well, I'm a collector. The first thing, I guess I've been a collector all my life. I have a small collection of René Lalique glass. But a couple of years ago, I started collecting antique postcards. Oh. And what I do is I collect the man in the moon, anything that has the man in the moon in it. And I have 450 antique postcards from the turn of the century that all have the man in the moon on.
Anything else with the man in the moon?
I have jewelry, I have teapots, I have night lights, I have Christmas tree ornaments, I have Art Nouveau mirrors, you name it. I've got a whole bunch. And so that led me to being interested in other people's collections. What gets them interested? How do they derive what they want to collect? And then once you're a collector, you start collecting other things too. I go to a lot of flea markets, and I'll be with a friend, one of my directors, she collects California pottery. Well, I don't. But now I'm going to flea markets and going, gee, that's cute. I like that. Maybe I should buy that.
Do you think you would start the next thing? You think you start?
Then I have another collection.
There are great books on postcards, aren't there? And are any of your postcards in the book?
They are. They are not my particular ones, but you know, there's more than one copy usually of any given postcard.
What was the most interesting segment as far as collectors?
Well, I'd have to say Colleen Moore, who was a silent film star in the 1920s. At that time, she had the set builders build her a miniature fairy tale castle, which is on permanent view in Chicago at the Museum of Science and Industry. It's unbelievable. Gives me goose pimples just talking about it. It's got chairs that are studded with diamonds and emeralds and pearls and rubies in the chandeliers, and inlaid quartz in the flooring, and just unbelievable one-of-a-kind pieces. A set of miniature china that the Queen of England also has a set of. So her collection was just mind-blowing.
So she collected the miniatures, every little thing that went into this castle. Had she started collecting the miniatures first and then had the castle built?
I think what happened is at the time, because she put this fairy tale castle on view on the United States to get money for crippled children's funds. So I think that all came together at the same time for her. And she believed in fairies. She was a very ethereal woman, you know, and so...
So fairies, Kathleen
there you go.
Spiegelman's, we have our angels and our fairies on our set. Once again. You were talking about antique stoves, I think. Did you say that earlier today?
Yes, that was one of the segments I did on the home show. There's a shop in town here that restores antique stoves, and I happen to have one of them, and they're just wonderful fun.
But that's kind of a hard thing to collect. Where do you put everything? I mean, can you collect 5 antique stoves?
Well, I only have the one, so I don't have a collection of them, but you know, that's the problem. Where do you find space for your collections? And another segment that I did on the home show is creating display space for your collections, and one way to do it is to cut into the wall and make a niche between the studs and light it from underneath and behind.
But something like postcards is pretty easy, right?
Yeah, and well, I frame them. Which costs,
you do?
Yes, I frame them. Usually if you really collect postcards, you'll find them in sets. One artist who did one particular look will do 4, 5, 6 of the same theme. So I'll collect all of those, and then I'll have them matted and framed. So I'm running out of wall space.
That's what I was going to say. I thought you just kept...
I need an extra house just for wall space for artwork to hang.
Your postcards in a box. I would always think that a shoe box would take care of that collection.
Oh, no, they have to be in all kinds of special covers so that they don't disintegrate. So you have to be very careful when you're collecting, especially paper goods.
Oh, so you do have to have them archivally taken care of? Really?
When you frame them, you have to make sure they're acid-free paper so that it doesn't eat up the image. And in books, I put them in Mylar sheets.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
it's a whole science. Yes. You know, once you start collecting something, you learn about a whole bunch of other things.
We have a clip to show what an actress you are, even if away from the question and answers, away from the collecting, something from Hunter. Do you think you could set it up and tell us who's in it?
This was a lot of fun. This was a character that I created called Kitty O'Hearn, and she was an undercover cop who appeared very ditzy, but she knew what was going on all the time.
You created the character? And how often would she reoccur in them?
I did several episodes of her, yeah.
So would you leave her lingering so that you could be written into the next?
Yes, I did. How smart of me.
Let's see that.
Okay.
Hi. Oh, there you are. Thought maybe you'd taken off for lunch or something. No, I was just having a talk with the captain. Well, what do you think? About what? The case. You think you can handle it? Yeah. I made a copy of everything we have on Shaughnessy. You should read it when you get a chance.
What is it? Is life history?
Just the illegal part. About a year ago, my captain put together a task force on organized crime. Every rock we turned over had one of Shaughnessy's men hiding under it.
Well, if Shaughnessy's so dirty, why haven't you been able to bust him?
Because we can't tie him to anything directly. His flunkies do all the hands-on stuff and keep him insulated.
With a rap file this thick,
has to be an opening somewhere. We almost had one. The main man in Shaughnessy's organization, he was ready to testify against him in exchange for a reduced charge on an extortion rap.
And?
The guy skipped bail. We didn't know where he was for a week. Found him floating face down in the harbor. Since then, not a peep out of anybody working for Shaughnessy.
Well, listen. I don't care how much muscle Shaughnessy has. P.S. Hunter, we'll get him.
You know something? We're gonna work just great together.
That was good. You two can work together.
Yes.
I hate to ask you this, but are you two related?
You know, I was just saying that my cousin thought in the picture in the TV guide that it was both of Stephanie Kramer. We look a lot alike with our bone structure, I think, not our coloring.
Very much.
Yeah.
We talked about like kind of keeping your person on the edge, your character on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever written so that you could also write and keep her going?
Well, I haven't written for that, and that shows off the air, but I did recently write a script. Yes, I did.
And do you write for yourself, or are you writing for other people?
There's a part in there for me, but I'd just be happy to get it produced with or without me at this point. It was fun. It was a fun project.
Before we leave, let's have a typical Shelley Taylor Morgan day.
Oh gosh, first thing, hit the health club, work out ravenously, and come home, make phone calls, get dressed for the day, go to meetings in the afternoon, try to get some personal errands run, play with the cat somewhere in between.
That's your day, every day?
Yeah, well, yeah, and then on the home show, get up really early in the morning, like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, so.
If life is not as glamorous as people think
No,
it
it
is.
isn't.
And the other thing, when I talked to you today, you were at home feeding the hummingbirds.
I have about 150 hummingbirds in my backyard. It's like something from the set of The Birds.
Why?
You wouldn't believe how many I have.
How did they come to you?
Well, I feed them.
I
And
know.
every year they double up on me. I'm filling up these big feeders once a day, and I have 4 of them. So it's unbelievable.
This was
I love
great. I
hummingbirds.
called Shelley today and she said, "Don't go away, don't go away." And she's yelling in the phone, "I'm feeding the birds."
Yes.
And I went, oh my gosh.
I had a handful of sugar water when you called.
And then she said, "The sugar, we're running out of sugar
That's
around
right.
here." And we're running out of time.
It was fun.
Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much.
much for being with us. And we'll see you right after the break. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and I'm back with artist Tony Berlant. Tony was born in 1941 in New York City. He moved to California with his family, where he spent his teenage years. He attended USC and received a Master of Fine Arts from UCLA in 1965. He went on to teach at UCLA for the next 5 years. His work has been exhibited at major museums across America as well as Europe. Tony's represented by the LA Louvre Gallery in Venice and the sister gallery, Louvre in New York. He lives in Santa Monica with his wife and his daughter. Should we call you a sculptor, Tony, or an artist, or what do you think is a good label?
Call me brilliant.
Oh, that's good.
No, I came up at that time that in the late 50s when people were very interested in blurring the distinctions between painting and sculpture and calling themselves object makers. Remember?
Yes, yes, actually.
And so, in a funny way, it's both a blessing and a curse that whatever moment you sort of blossom,
So
somehow you're always stuck with that. I've noticed that.
So you feel like you're an object maker?
Well, I've just noticed that I like that category to blur the distinctions between painting and sculpture.
But one of the things, actually, when you talk about making objects, I remember years ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, you were making quilts. So those were a different type of object.
Yeah, that was a brief time when I wanted to be very anonymous and kind of humble. And I made those things because they seemed like they were non-elevated, humble traditions, making a quilt, for instance.
Well, talking about quilts, what other media do you work in?
Well, I've tried all kinds of materials, but primarily what I've worked in from the early 60s is found metal collage, finding things like waste paper baskets and TV trays and cans and cutting them up and reassembling them.
So when you talk about found metal, it's something like what we have here on the set. All the pieces that make up this painting is
They probably
part of a found
Yeah, well, they
object.
probably come from maybe 20 different objects, and they're little snippets of color.
And how do
Okay.
you find them?
Just one at a time. So, you know, in trash cans, it's swap meets,
You don't have like
thrift stores.
a source you can go
Well, I
to?
have friends that I call tin scouts who, when they're out looking for for collage things for them, find me tin things. And then about 5 years ago, I became very friendly with the place that's actually the biggest printer of all sorts of tin things on the West Coast, in Cucamonga. And so they let me go out there to the factory and go through their tin and get all kinds of sheets of things even before they've been put together.
Do they throw them away? Are they always like things that were thrown out, or?
Well, I started out with things that were thrown out when they wouldn't let me in the factory, but over the years they've become very supportive and involved with my work, and they let me go in the factory and get the things that are printed on these big machines before they're made into the objects, and then they let me manipulate the big machines now and print my own tin. So that evolved into those bigger things that I make for public commissions, or like the images in the middle of these things are little mistakes made by these giant printing presses.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that your work had evolved from the found objects to something where you now can manipulate the work on the tin. This was a mistake. We were talking about the thing in the center here. It's a hummingbird?
Well, it's just a process that I like to do of looking at these spots, and then when I see things that are particularly evocative and look like something to me, then I make a frame for the image.
So this basically is the image that you found that you liked and then framed over and over and over. When you work, do you have architecture in mind? Is there bigger pieces? You talked about commissions.
Yeah,
that
I've
you
made some
used.
very large pieces in the recent years, you know, like 2 or 3 story high kinds of interior pieces for museums and airports and things. And I continue to make small, highly subjective works at home. But I have my next show, there are pieces that are 10 by 12 feet. I like big
Those are
things,
big.
and I like little things.
But the thing, I saw the piece in Minneapolis at the museum, and it was 2 stories high.
3 stories. Well, 37.5 feet, whatever that is.
So that
There
was.
it's 3 stories.
And was that your own design? Does the person who commissions you let you make whatever you want, or do you work in collaboration, or?
No, I like to have just total freedom, that they've signed up for an unknown experience and that their confidence has to be based on the things. I've just done a piece for the city of Palm Springs, which we'll install down there briefly. And the other people who were making proposals showed proposals for this project, but I just showed them large photographs of the 3 previous projects I had done, and said you actually get a better idea of what you're going to get if you just look at other completed works, and I don't make any proposals.
So they accept
and they have
you.
to just snap on their seatbelt and go along for the ride. And in the end, they're very happy with the piece, and that makes it a vital experience for me rather than just blowing up a thing. It becomes a job then, which I'm not interested in.
But you're creating all the time as you go on with this big piece. It just kind of works. We talked about, I talked with you about this, about how an artist has their touch on each thing when they make a piece. You either see the color or you see something that speaks of the artist. And I always think Tony Berlant speaks of these nail heads, and I often wonder if you have a pattern that fits into your work. You can see all the little nail heads on here.
Well, the pattern is just like the pattern of the brush strokes if you're painting, or the pencil marks if you're drawing. It's just the rhythmic building motion. The nails are necessary to hold the thing together. So there is a pattern, but it's that kind of echo of, it speaks of the unseen hand of the artist. You get that sense of the presence of the maker.
I know you made a lot of these houses. I guess they're called houses. I don't know for what you call them, but they always have little intriguing things about them. This has the it has pancakes.
Heavenly pancakes.
Heavenly
Levitating
pancakes.
pancakes.
But take us through the process of what this is, what kind of frame this is, how you start, and how you got to the pancakes.
It's built over a wooden form, and this particular piece is a piece that has to do with sort of domestic experience. It has...
and then are all the forms obviously different sizes? Because you make different size houses.
Yeah, each one is individually.
And then how does the metal give us
Well, I have all
bit.
these bits and snippets of found things that are piled up, thousands of them in my studio, as you know. It's just big heaps of junk, and I just sort of shuffle around in there and push through the things until I find images or color that I respond to, and I put one piece down, and then I go back into the piles of material and look, and then I find the next thing that I respond to.
And then
I just put them together like that until the whole piece is some kind of presence or statement that reveals itself to me.
You use tin snippers,
Little
because I've
tin
seen you
snips,
work, and
yeah.
you wear something on your eyes,
No, just tin snips and a hammer.
and that's
It's
it?
very simple technique in terms of the tools.
This work is done, obviously, this domestic little thing, it's done here now in Santa Monica, where you live with Helen and your daughter. You've had studios all over, I guess, the world. I don't know. Tell us where your studios have.
Well, just, different locations in Santa Monica and Venice, and I've had a studio in New York for a long time.
Does your work differ when you're living in different places?
Well, I was just bi-coastal for a very brief period of a couple of years, three or 4 years, maybe 8 years ago, and I would work in New York, and I didn't feel that it was particularly different, actually.
Would you be picking up junk in New York as well?
Oh, sure.
Oh, so
yeah.
do you think that makes a difference in your work?
What, the materials?
Yes.
Certainly the materials that influence me, whatever place I'm in. But it's peculiar because artists carry the psychic space, and most artists, for some reason, always want to make work or need to make work about the images that they experienced as a child. So no matter where you are, you seem to revert back into these, the authenticity of the place you were formed. But certainly making work in New York is a different kind of experience because it's not such an oddball outsider experience. It's still fairly an outsider kind of activity in Los Angeles.
Now, talking about going back to your experiences, I know the blue piece, which is another image in the center next to you, and it's framed all the way around, very almost symmetrical. It shows an image, it looks like of the water, and could be Catalina to me.
Yeah, it reminds me of Malibu looking south towards Los Angeles with this kind of spectral figure.
The other things that you've done were more loosely put together, I think, with I don't know, kind of an enigma of the symbolism that you had included. Is this a total change from what you did not so long ago?
Well, these particular group of works are related to my interest, I think, in Tibetan mandalas that I was interested in last year. I think that's what these have manifested themselves out of. But I'm making other big works that are more like my earlier work. But these are pretty enigmatic because they're just little splotches that I find that remind me of things that I think are then evocative. And they're not fixed exactly what they're supposed to mean at all.
This is more of what I was talking about before, where
there's
there's
more
a
drawing.
looseness. There's a drawing quality.
Yeah, I'm doing more drawing there, sure.
But this is all done with tin. Do you do it on a piece of paper first before you...
I draw on Mylar usually, or I draw on the plywood supports that the pieces are built on.
And when you're not doing this, when you're not making art, what do you do? What do you
Sleep.
Do you have time for anything else?
I have time for my wife and my daughter, Kate, and seeing my friends occasionally.
And do you just hang out with artists, or do you have you don't like to be with artists? How do you feel about it? Do you like to be with artists, or don't you like to be with
pretty much
them?
the artists are the only people who don't get bored with talking about art all the time. So most of my friends, who you know, are a very small group of people who it's the same people for 30 years. And it's one thing that's interesting about any kind of a city in the art scene is there are these separate scenes that come up generationally.
But something like your work, there's no one else doing work like this.
No.
So, and has there ever been this?
Not that I know of.
So when you talk about the other artists, you're with painters, you're with ceramists, you're with Ken Price, painters, Ed Moses
is my best friend probably in LA, who's an artist. And Kenny.
Ken
Bob
Price.
Graham. And
Bob Graham, who's a sculptor on a different level.
Karen Carson is a painter.
So, well, we're going to see how far this evolves. It's very interesting to see that now you're manipulating your tin and to see where it goes from that. We'll go to the Louvre Gallery in New York and in Venice and see your work. And thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Joan.
I'm glad you were here. Thanks for being with us on Joan Quinn, etc. And we'll see you next time.